Everybody good with, you're seeing what I'm seeing? Okay, cool. So as you can see, it is a density per square mile in this case, population density. First of all, scale matters. At this scale, you see some patterns. Maybe they're expected, maybe they're not expected. Right, east part of the U.S., a little bit denser in terms of population, a little bit on the west as well, but right in the center, a little bit less dense, okay? Now, you math teachers, right, you might want to tie this to your discussion on what is density, right? Something per square something. Density of water wells, density of Sonic drive-ins, density of Dairy Queens, right? It doesn't have to be a physical thing like population. It could be like a human structure on the landscape. The density of traffic lights in El Paso. Where are there more traffic lights? So density is a good concept to bring across with mapping, I think. So I'm going to zoom in, and as I do that, what's your expectation of how the density is going to change? Is all of Texas the certain, I'm going to click in Texas, is all of Texas the same number of people per square mile? No. Like if you went east on I-10, right, toward Beaumont, that's a long drive. You'd have to stop, if you were me, you'd have to stop at Pilot for numerous cups of coffee on the way to Beaumont. Right? It's a long way to Beaumont. It's like 900 miles, right? That'd be an interesting thing. What is the mileage marker on I-10 when you cross into Louisiana? I wonder what it is. It's got to be 900 something. Fascinating. Okay, so you're looking at Texas. I clicked on Texas, and as I do so, it says, okay, again, thinking about the data, this is 2012 data, so it's getting a little bit dated. But according to this data set, remember our phrase from yesterday, according to this data set, 2012, total land area divided by population, that's how we get density. So it's a little bit of a, what is density, okay? Pop per square mile, 99, 2012. Different in West Texas versus East Texas, as you folks are hypothesizing. And then now let's zoom in and see if your hypothesis was correct, okay? Square feet per person, I love that. That is an interesting figure. Get the students, draw a little polygon on a as you zoom in, and get it to be 281,000 square feet, and see how big that is, right? Is that like the size of all of Isleta Middle School? I mean, I don't know what that is offhand, but that's how many feet per person average, right, for Texas. Is it the same for North Dakota? Probably not. All right, but that's interesting. Separation, feet between each person, 530 feet. Interesting. Love that stuff. Okay, so as we zoom into Texas, we could zoom in like this with our mouse or our touchpad, or we could type in Texas in the upper right and zoom into Texas that way. At this scale now, notice on the left side is counties. So I think it's important for students to look at different levels of geography, get them to think about, okay, state, county, what's a county? How many counties in Texas? How many counties in Texas? There's a lot, right? A lot of counties, big states, like a whole nother country.
254.
You are my hero. You are my hero. Exactly. My favorite county in Texas is Tom Green County because it's got this little peninsula on it that extends way over into the other county. It's not actually that far from you all. It's like 150 miles east. Anyway, Tom Green County, really fascinating. We might be able to look at it in a minute. Anyway, so now you see at the county level, there are some differences. So Dallas-Fort Worth, right? Texas Hill Country, Houston. So it's a little bit more in terms of density of population, a little bit denser in the eastern part of Texas, as you hypothesized. As we zoom in, we're still at the county level, and also El Paso, right? A little bit denser than the surrounding counties because you've got an urban area there. All right, we'll keep zooming in. As we zoom in now, we're going to start seeing the census tracts. The tracts, T-R-A-C-T-S, tracts. These are neighborhoods at the, like super neighborhoods. Think of them as sub-counties, super neighborhoods. So as we go into the tract level, we're going to see some different patterns, but reinforcing in some ways what we saw earlier. In other words, now we're going to really see the Dallas-Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, you know, San Marcos sort of area, Midland, Odessa, El Paso at the census tract level. Okay. All right, let's keep going. If we go into El Paso a little bit more, now we're going to see block groups. These are neighborhoods actually now as we keep zooming in to El Paso. Okay. At the neighborhood level, where are the most densely settled neighborhoods in El Paso? And okay, so as we do that, we're going to see some really interesting patterns. And again, you've got the power at your fingertips to change the base map to something like a street map. Because you and I, when we look at this map, we kind of have an idea of where things are in El Paso, but now I'm 11 years old. You know, I don't know where even my middle school is. I have no idea. I don't have a context. So you could change the base map to something like Openstreetmap or something with a little bit more in the way of streets on it. Okay, so that might be an enhancement to the lesson. Openstreetmap. That's a crowdsourced street layer, by the way. More about crowdsourcing when you guys talk about Survey 123. Ordinary people adding data. All right, so now I'm looking at tracts as well, and I'm seeing the density of population here, and I'm going to click on one of these, and this one has a fairly high population density. It's up around 10,000 people per square mile. Now, my hypothesis, just looking at that, is where do I get a lot of people in a small amount of area? It's not going to be single-family homes, right? So it's probably an apartment complex, is my guess, or even a dormitory or something. I don't know exactly what's out there, but I can find out, right? Because I can change the base map to something like imagery with labels, and if I do that, I'm going to zoom into that neighborhood a little bit more. I'm going to go to content and turn off the population density, so I'm zooming into that neighborhood, and just to investigate what's there. See where I'm going with this? I'm going to look at population density and try to teach students what population density is with this map. Also, on a broader context, you could anchor it to your history lesson, right? Why is East Texas more densely settled than generally West Texas? You could talk about the history of settlement of Texas and why more people settle in the East, right? Biomes, ecoregions, access to water being all important there. So, okay, fascinating. So now I'm going to turn back on my population density and look at the different neighborhoods. But wouldn't it be interesting to look at some other components of the population? One of which I think is really interesting, it's also tied to mathematics, is looking at the median age. The median age. So one of the ways to introduce this, and you probably have even better ideas being the awesome teachers that you are, conduct a poll in the class about what the median age is of the class. So let's say you're teaching 8th grade, right? And they're 13-ish, 14, right? So you conduct a poll and you've got a median age of, let's say it's 14.1 of all your students. And then you add yourself in, and you're not as old as I am, so you're going to bump it up a little bit. Maybe it's now 20. Maybe the median age of the class is 20, including the teacher, okay? So you talk about what a median is, okay? Great. Now, put that whole thing onto a neighborhood. What is the median age of the whole neighborhood? Well, they're not the same everywhere, which is really interesting. The median age differs. Why is that? And get the students to think about, with your guidance, how do I get the legend on this map, by the way? I've got a bunch of different colors, and I've clicked on median age. How do I get the legend? See how good you folks are? You don't even need me. Forget about it. Exactly. You pull up the legend tab, and now I see that blue is older, red is younger. Okay? So now it's really interesting. I'm going to change my base map now to something like, I don't know, terrain with labels so I can see some streets underneath the polygons. And as I do that, I can see that you've got a really diverse population in terms of median age. And I know you've got a diversity of population in terms of other things too. So let's just take a look at median age here. Wow. So I can see that as I go east of El Paso, there's a younger. There's a neighborhood north of 180 that's a little bit older. And then there's also a couple neighborhoods close to downtown that are younger and older. Got kind of a mixture in there. Ooh, really interesting. If I go over to Fort Bliss, it's younger because of why? It's a military base, and not everybody there is 20-something. But if I look at, and here's a nice additional math integration. If I click on one of these neighborhoods at the block group level, look at this. I've got a nice way of integrating a little bit of histogram. What is a histogram? You know, why is it important? What can we do with it? So here I can see that 0.66 or 66%, basically 2/3 of the population of that whole neighborhood that I clicked on is 20-something. So not everybody there is 20-something, but a lot of them are. Okay. I also have some kids there. So you get the students to think about, well, you know, some of those military families have kids that are 0 to 9. And so you've got some 0 to 9s, and you've still got some teens, and you do have a couple of 30s and 40s, but nobody older than that, according to this data set. Now this is aggregate for that neighborhood. Really interesting. One of the things I like to do with students at this point is challenge them, okay, who can find a neighborhood that's younger than this one? This one has a median age of 22.7. Who can find a younger neighborhood than that? So they start, you know, investigating different neighborhoods, and this one is 22.8, so doesn't qualify, right? And you can look at toward the campus, the UTEP campus, it's going to be a little younger there too, but not as young as the military base. Really interesting. So then go down to your own neighborhood.
Okay.
2012 in this case, we're looking at 6-year-old data, sure. Can I add more recent data? Sure. But for the purpose of this exercise, this is a map that I had already compiled with about 8 different layers in it, and so that's what I'm using. But yes, you can use the Add Data button and see if you've got some more recent information, which will definitely exist. There's 20 to 17 median age for sure. All right, I just added a place marker on Isleta Middle School, and so now I can see the neighborhood that your middle school actually falls in, and you can see here that's pretty young, 28.8. I've got a lot of kids in that neighborhood. Hey, maybe good job security for the teachers, right? You've got a decent number of students in that neighborhood. There's a bunch of teenagers, 20% roughly of the population, almost 20% are 0 to 9. So between those two age groups, that's 40% of the neighborhood population. As of 2012 was school age, basically. Okay, and then you've got some 20-somethings, some 30-somethings, 50-somethings, etc. Fascinating. Okay, now let's do this. Let's do this, folks. Once again, remember from yesterday, we have a transparency tool. So you don't have to have the streets blocked out underneath it. You can actually make the median age semi-transparent so you can see what's underneath. What's underneath, I think, would be helpful is something like a topographic base or a street map base, so you can get some context of where these neighborhoods are, okay? So that's just one thing I wanted to remind you of that you can do, okay? So now I've got a street base in there and I can see what's in the middle there, okay? Now, what about this? Is there any relationship between median age and something like median income? You know, as you get older, as a neighborhood gets older, does the median income actually go up or does it go down? So one way to find that out would be to look at, how about median income? Do we have median income in this data set? We have median home value and median household income. There it is. So if I click on median household income and I turn off the median age, I'm going to get a different set of colors. And again, as you pointed out earlier, if I pop up this legend, I'm going to see the colors and what they mean, the legend. So as you probably had guessed, the median household income, the darker purples are higher and the lighter colors are lower median household income. Now I know all you teachers must live over here in this neighborhood, right? This neighborhood over to the east. The median household income there is quite high. It's 101,000. And it looks like, according to this data set, as of that year, it was 103% above the median, or the US average, right? Median and average being slightly different things, and we can talk about that in math class. But it's 103% above, so it's quite a bit higher. What is this neighborhood? Okay, Again, if we had time, we could change the base map and look at the actual homes in that area. What do I expect to see? Am I going to see a bunch of small apartment buildings, or am I going to see some pretty big houses in that area? Big houses. Okay. If the median household income is fairly high, yeah, my hypothesis is really aligned with yours. I'm probably going to see some, and you guys have local knowledge of this place, right? So you have an idea of what it looks like, and so I'm going to turn off the median, the street-based map for a bit. I'm going to turn on median household income, maybe make it a little bit transparent, and I'm going to look at that neighborhood right there. And so, right, interesting.
It's a gated community.
But anyway, fascinating to be able to look at the images and the data. Let's do one more thing. Let's look at diversity index. Actually, two more things. Let's look at the diversity index. And I think this warrants a little bit of an explanation. The diversity index, and how do I know this? Well, again, under the About layer is an explanation of exactly what all these layers mean. So the diversity index, if I went to About, it would give more explanation. But in brief, the diversity index is 100 is more diverse, 0 is less diverse. Okay, so here in El Paso, as you know from living there, you've got a pretty diverse population, right? So the more high on the diversity index means that any two people chosen at random in that level of geography, whether it's state, county, census tract, or block group, are of a different ethnicity. Okay, they have a totally different background ethnic-wise. Okay, so that's the diversity index. And as you know from living in an international community, it's quite high in El Paso. Now, if I went to another place around the country, would it be the same? What if I went to, I don't know, Houston, or how about Abilene? If I went to Abilene, is the diversity index as high? Don't know. Let's go check it out. So if I look at Abilene, it looks like, okay, it's actually pretty diverse, but in the counties and the rural lands surrounding the city, it's less diverse. Interesting, right? So rural versus urban diversity index. In a university city like El Paso, I mean, even without the international border there, you would have expected El Paso to be a bit more diverse than a non-university community, right? Because universities tend to bring in people, scholars from all over the world. Interesting. So if I keep zooming out, what's your hypothesis of this diversity index, like by county? That would be interesting, wouldn't it? Yeah, so let's keep zooming out and look at the county level diversity index. So this is just another way of looking at the population. Really fascinating. How are you folks doing? This is one of those golden moments where if you give the students, some context for what diversity is. I was in a middle school not long ago and looking at diversity and median age, and it was one of those times where you just kind of sit back and bask in the amazing things the students are doing, because they were totally driving it at that point. They were like, oh, I'm going to look at, where I go and see my grandma down in New Mexico and look at the neighborhoods down there and so on. So they're totally driving it at this point. Now, the reason why it's so slow for drawing for me is because I have the image base map behind the map. So this is one of those moments where, in the classroom, be sensitive to your bandwidth, right? So you don't need to have the image on at this point. So you can go ahead and change that back to something like a light gray canvas. And so you're just focused on the diversity index. Yep. And that drew a lot faster. Okay, fascinating. So you look at Texas as a whole, right? The diversity index is higher in Texas. Then conduct a little poll in your classroom. Where are you from? What's your country of origin? Yeah, what's your background? So do a poll and then connect it to a larger context. Fascinating stuff. Okay, let's look at one more thing in this particular data set. This data set, this map that, as you saw, contains about 10 or 12 different layers, each of which is really a lesson in itself. It's rich with amazing content. One of the other things that I like to look at is population change. So looking at change over time, in this case, 2010 to 2012, I'm going to pop up that legend, and I'm going to see that at the county level, some places in Texas are increasing in population, including El Paso, and some places actually are declining in population, and getting the students to think about, really? Not everything is increasing? I mean, the US population is what, 317 million, something like that? You mean not every place is increasing? No. Why? And then you can talk about economics, jobs, perception of the climate, movement, international and national migration, and so on. So as you can see here, even parts of Texas are actually declining in population. So you can zoom into, for example, this particular county that I clicked on, Fisher County, it decreased by 0.89, so less than 1%, 0.79, and then over here, 2012 to 2017, minus 0.71. So why is that? Agriculture, right? The diversification of and mechanization of agriculture, needing less people on the landscape, and so on, okay? So really interesting stuff. Okay, I promised that would be the last thing, but can we do one more tiny thing? Or are you guys gonna be like running out of the room screaming? No más, no más, no more. Okay, one last thing, and that is, this is a really fascinating data set, and is the Tapestry Segmentation. So you sociology, human geography type, you might really like this. This Tapestry Segmentation, which came out of a book called The Clustering of America, was the first book on geodemographics. How many of you have ever gotten ads pushed out to you on the internet or at home with certain specific ads because you have kids or you're in a certain lifestyle or and so on, right? It's targeted marketing is what it is, okay? This is tied to that. So how do we classify neighborhoods with certain lifestyles, certain TV shows that they watch, certain sporting events or non-sporting events, certain ways that they commute to work, what kinds of jobs do they have, what interests do they have, and so on. If companies, right, can understand behaviors of people, then they can push ads to them. Now, how many of you have ever been on the internet and you start looking at, I don't know, chairs? Okay, you need to buy a chair. You start looking at chairs, and then you go to different websites, and then you've got a chair ad, right? It's like, because of the cookies, right? The history of where you're searching is being dropped, and so then you get ads pushed out to you. Okay, so get the students thinking about that a bit, and as we go into your part of the state, I'm going to click on one of the counties, and I've got the Tapestry Segmentation there. And this is what's interesting about this. This is the county, the dominant tapestry or behavior group is something called Southwestern families. Now, scale matters. At this scale, that is the predominant tapestry segment for that county. If we go to your county, what is the dominant segmentation or tapestry layer for your county? It is industrious urban fringe in that particular neighborhood that I clicked on. But let's zoom in. You've got a diversity of, and let's pull up the legend, of neighborhood types in El Paso, right? Not everybody in El Paso behaves the same way. Now, as we go in, this is a good way of introducing students to aggregates versus individuals, because some student will say, well, I live in that neighborhood and I'm not Southwestern family. I don't fit that demographic. Or my Uncle Charlie lives in that neighborhood and he's not furs and station wagons. He's not lattes and laptops, which are the, really interesting names for these neighborhoods. So, and you can say, yes, exactly. There are individuals that make up neighborhoods, and this isn't you as an individual. This is your predominant in your neighborhood. So if I go down to Isleta Middle School and I look at these, I'm going to click in some of these neighborhoods now, and Census Tracts Southwestern families. So now the easiest way to figure out what Southwestern families are is just to open a new tab and type in something like Esri Tapestry Southwestern families, or whatever one you've clicked on. That's the easiest way of pulling up the one-page PDF that gives you the Tapestry infographic, if you will, for that neighborhood type. So I'm going to pull up Southwestern Families here in a separate tab. I just searched on ESRI, ESRI. What did I search on? Neighborhood or Tapestry, I think. ESRI, Tapestry, Southwestern Families. And I'm going to pull up that little PDF. And the interesting thing is that, yes, not everybody that makes up that group, that neighborhood is Southwestern Family. Lots of exceptions. But overall, it's almost kind of creepy how accurate a lot of these are. So, okay, young families, lots of children, et cetera, what do they, 32% have attended or graduated from college, et cetera. Here they're mindful of environmental concerns, and so on. So you got this wonderful data set of population pyramid. You got race and ethnicity, income, et cetera, et cetera. So getting the students to think about integrating this into looking at the diversity of neighborhoods, for example, in El Paso, that not everybody in El Paso is what we call Southwestern Families. Where was my map? I think I turned off that layer. So in this particular case, did you have a lesson associated with the map? No. If you pulled up this map that I have linked to in our workshop today, if you have this pulled up and you look at median home value or median age or one of the other variables we looked at, population change over time, et cetera, you, as the creative educators that you are, you could teach with this map. You don't actually have to have a lesson for every single map. Now, sometimes the lessons are helpful, and you might want to write a few questions associated with median age or median income and call it good. Or, in my way of thinking, it's like you getting a paper map of this same thing. If I gave you a paper map of this same thing, like, when I used to work at the USGS, we had a map called This Dynamic Planet. It was earthquakes, volcanoes, and plate boundaries. And I used to lay that out in a table, and so did teachers, and they still do. And you could teach from that map. You don't actually have to have a lesson for that map. Same thing here. You don't actually have to have a written down step-by-step lesson. Knowing what you do about geotechnologies, you know how to turn on and off layers, you know how to make them transparent, you know how to get into the table of data behind the data set, you know how to zoom and pan, etc. So you could actually teach with this wonderful map with about 12 different layers in it. Right? Okay, cool. Enough said about that, but I encourage you to go into this map. There's some other layers that we did not look at. We did not look at social vulnerability. We did not look at we looked at the tapestry. We looked at the diversity index. You could look at the population aged 0 to 18, where are more kids, etc. And then, so what? So what if we know where there's more kids? And hopefully the students will start saying, well, we know there needs to be more schools there, and there needs to be more skateboard parks, and there needs to be more, I don't know, whatever other services are targeted to kids. Okay, more parks maybe. All right, very good. So let's have a break. You've been solidly digging into data and looking at questions and watersheds and landslides and what else do we look at? The diversity index and down to the last drop, the Aral Sea and dams along rivers. So lots of different data and questions that we're answering and asking. So I hope that was interesting for all y'all. All right, Dr. M, Dr. O, Ms. Duran, over to you. All right, folks, good to see you back here. Let me have a geo moment with you. I truly love that demographic data that we were looking at in the last segment. I mean, Just let me have a moment. Okay, I'm good. But seriously, there are so many wonderful questions that can come out of such things, and it's all scalable, right? So you can start with states and then look at counties and look at neighborhoods. I know that many of you are new to this, but just kind of envision with me doing this in the past where we had a group of teachers and we had to make sure all those data layers actually overlaid. Maybe Dr. M can identify. It was a real pain to get all that stuff into the same map projection and get it all overlaid. And now having all that at your fingertips, it makes it a lot easier to use it in education. That's for sure. I realize that there are still some challenges, and that's why we need each other. We need this network. But having that at your fingertips it's a beautiful thing. Let me just say that. All right. Questions from that last segment where we looked at the landslide, the Errol C changes, and then median age, median income, diversity index, tapestry layers for USA, and then in El Paso. Any questions that came to mind during the break?
Just come back to it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that last one, that USA demographics for schools, we've used that for several years now. We updated it occasionally, but that's a very good question, though, that you're bringing up about, hey, I want to be able to teach with this on October 1. Are these map layers going to be available? By and large, all of the things that we are looking at in these 2 days will be there. Now, that said, as you know from teaching with technology, these are map services. And so many of them are from other agencies. So I remember one time I was teaching about tornadoes, and I was using the NOAA Tornado Data Service. That layer wouldn't draw in my map. I'm like, hey, wait a minute, it's April. This is the height of tornado season. Where is that layer? Well, NOAA had moved it, and so I had to come up with plan B during that day, and I did a little investigation and found out where that layer had now moved to. So I'm not going to say that it never happens, because that's just an example of, oh, data layer not available. Okay, that's the nature of teaching with these tools. However, like I say, all of the things that we're looking at in these 2 days are solid, and all the maps, for example, that make up the geo inquiries, we regularly look at those and make sure all the links work. Also, as you know, you can save these maps. So you can, for example, go into the map that I just looked at with you all, and if you wanted to add a layer to it that's really suitable to what you're teaching in El Paso, you can do that and save it in your own ArcGIS Online account. Yeah, so then that way your maps are in your own organization. Now, they still may be pointing to some layers that are out at EPA or Texas Natural Resources Information Service or wherever, but you actually have more control over them because you've saved them in your own ArcGIS Online zone. More about that later. But good question that you're asking. Are these layers that we're looking at over these 2 days going to be available in the fall semester? Absolutely. All right, very good. I am going to get rid of this song lyric now. It's gone. It's toast. It's out of there. I'm not even going to save it. No. Joseph. No worries. Okay, now, I promise no more singing. However, this segment, we've got some really good things to look at, folks. We touched on the next activity yesterday ever so briefly, but it's this historical examination of El Paso and how it changed over time and why it changed over time. So in that outline, the syllabus basically for today, if you could click on that, using historical USGS topographic maps, historical investigation of El Paso, that would be grand. That would be grand. So if I click on that, it is what we call, and this is ever so slightly GIS-y, so kind of bear with me here. It's a web mapping application, a web mapping application. Why do I care about that if I'm a K-12 teacher? Well, because in a little bit, you're going to make your own web mapping application called a story map. And so think of the web mapping application as something that is How can I explain it? It's like a Lego structure, right? A structure of Lego bricks that you've put polyurethane on and maybe super glued. Okay. In other words, it's there. You cannot change it. Okay. You can use it. You can teach with it, but it's already produced. If you know what I mean. It's kind of like, here's another analogy. Remember Lunchables? Do they still make those? Lunchables. You know, it's like a little container of like cheese and crackers and maybe some turkey or something like that, some carrot sticks. You know what I mean? Yeah. Anyway, a Lunchable. It's already packaged. In other words, you can't alter it. You buy it as is, right? As opposed to going to the produce section of the grocery store, right? And customizing your own lunch, right? You pick the tomatoes, you pick the celery, right? You pick the crackers and the cheese and so on, right? Those are like the Lego bricks. And those are like those ArcGIS online maps we looked at earlier, where you could add things to it, you could delete things from it, right? And in the same way with all those maps tied to the geo-inquiries, those are like the Lego bricks. Those are like the produce section where you can add and change. But these web mapping applications like this one right here, they are the final Lunchable, like the final structure, the Lego. Hope that's not too many analogies. Anyway, the Topographic Map Explorer is a really powerful web mapping application. And have you folks pulled it up? Cool beans. It starts with New Orleans, as you know. Riding on the city of New Orleans. Oh, I promise no more singing. Sorry, it just slipped out. Now, this being a web mapping application, you can't change the layers in there, but you can change the location. So as you can see in the upper left, you can change it and you can say, no, I want to look at El Paso, Texas, in the upper left there. And it gives you some choices. And the one I want to look at is El Paso, Texas, USA. So I'm going to click there. Now, being U.S. Geological Survey, that automatically should get into your mind, okay, this is USA, okay? It's not Albania, Kazakhstan, etc. Unlike some of the things we were looking at earlier that were global. This is USGS topos, and they're only produced in this country. That being said, can I access historical maps in other countries? Sure. Like if I wanted to look at Juarez and how it's changed, I might be able to get some data from INEGI, right? Basically the counterpart USGS combination EPA from Mexico. Yeah, I might be able to do that. And if they've got some layers in ArcGIS Online, I might be able to add those. In fact, at El Paso del Norte spatial data archive that you guys have is really quite good. If we had time, maybe we could look at it. But that's got a lot of spatial data. Maybe Dr. M touched on that yesterday for the whole region, not just the US side. All right, very good. But this particular one, we're going and we're scrolling around, and I'm going to go actually to the middle school where you folks are located right now. I wish I was with you, but I'm going to go kind of south east a little bit and go down to kind of around the neighborhood of the middle school. And then I'm going to click on the map, and it's giving me like crosshairs. And if I click on the map down in your neighborhood, I'm going to get this timeline, as you can see, across the bottom. And it gives me different layers with different timestamps corresponding to different USGS topographic maps as they were created way back. In this case, I'm hovering over 1908. I've got an 1896. Wonderful. Excellent. So I'm going to click on ones that might be of interest. And I'm going to stack them on the left side of the map. Ah, interesting. I'm just going to leave it right there at the moment. And then I'm going to make it sort of semi-transparent. Oh my. You see where I'm going with this, right, folks? I click on a map that is of interest to me. And then I'm going to maybe zoom in a bit. And you've got some different years, as you can see. I might want to click on the 1973. I remember 1973. Probably some of you weren't born yet. Definitely as ancient history year students, right? 1973, oh my gosh. Yeah, I remember hearing the Bee Gees on the radio. Okay. All right, so I've got 2 maps loaded now. I just couldn't help myself. I couldn't just stop at one. This is one of those tools where if you're teaching about history of settlement, why cities grew, why mining towns grew and declined over time, over the last 125 years, this is a great tool. You could talk about the impact of rivers, the impact of major transportation arteries, and how that contributed or not contributed to the city's development. Awesome. So I'll let you play around with this for a bit, and then we'll come back and summarize in a short bit, okay?
Okay, yeah, you're on, Dr. K.
Yes, sir.
Okay, you're ready for them?
How are they doing with that? Are they enjoying it? All right, folks. Yeah, thanks for the comment. This, I think, is quite valuable looking at change over time. I mean, if you just in the case of the last few minutes that we've spent, if you were looking at El Paso like I was, you see how the city, was just basically by downtown, right? And a little bit of the little east of there. But as you're pointing out, I mean, the railroads were the main thing that went in and out of town. Those roads that were sort of twisty and turny, they weren't that, especially back in, we were looking at that 1908. Have the students look at the kind of motors, the motorized transportation that was, in terms of vehicles back in 1908. I mean, this was right at the beginning of automobile production, right? So there was a big deal if someone actually went across a whole state back then, right? Because the road condition was horrible. So it was mainly railroads, right, that got people around, and goods and services and stuff. So looking at the spread of the city from its core to spreading east and a little bit north as well, and a little bit northeast is really fascinating. So, yeah, and then of course in the bigger context, true, right? Juarez. So how did that all affect the region, right? So, yeah, being able to pull up these, and we only looked at a couple of maps, but you can add different map layers to this and actually build a timeline with this. You may wonder, well, Joseph, I want to be able to look at other layers in here. And since you mentioned that it was a web mapping application, how do I add this to something like ArcGIS Online? Well, you can. You can actually add these historical layers. And why would you want to do that and do it outside of this sort of application where you've got this timeline? Well, there's 2 ways to do it. A, do it like we did in the last 5 minutes. B, add the layers to an existing map or to a new map in ArcGIS Online. The advantage there is now you can add ecoregions of Texas or historical railroads or mean annual precipitation or other layers that you might want to look at in the context of these historical map layers. And one more note that's a bit techie, but notice that these are images. They're scanned maps. So you can't click on individual features and get attributes or a table of data behind them because they're just scans. So we've got 2 different kinds of information that we're working with here. We've got map layers that you can actually click on and get information out of. And those map layers, they could be points, lines, polygons. They could even be images. Like remember yesterday we were looking at that Sentinel-2 imagery for Kilauea. We actually clicked in there and we could get the image date and so on. So there's actually some intelligence built into the images. They don't have to be points, lines, and polygons. So those kinds of map layers versus these kinds of map layers, which are scans, right? They're scanned historical aerial photos or maps. And they don't actually have a database behind them. They know where they are on the planet, so they have geo-rectification, we call it, but they don't actually have attributes, right? So you can't click on the road and find out what the road name is or something like that. Nevertheless, they are quite fascinating to look at the spread and distribution of cities. And you could look at a place in conjunction with this, how El Paso has grown. You could look at something like Virginia City, Nevada, or some other old Central City, Colorado, near me, some sort of mining town that's actually gone down in population, and look at how big it was 100 years ago and how small it is today. So not every place has grown. Excellent. All right, folks, we are good with the historical topo, hopefully. And now let's look at a couple of examples of what students have done with ArcGIS Online, Geographic Information Systems, geotechnology, okay? First thing, I wanted to pull up, and let's say I wanted you to look at the following. Are you able to see this big WordPad document that I've got pulled up right now? Okay. Why don't you pull up this ever so briefly? Let me biggerize it here. So no www in front, just sreurl.com USK12GIS. Are you folks seeing a map with a bunch of little red schoolhouses on it? Okay, I know it's a little bit geeky in terms of how we symbolized it, but each one of those little red schoolhouses corresponds to a school that has an ArcGIS Online organizational subscription. The reason why I brought this up is because I wanted you to see that you're not alone. There are thousands of other educators that have, like you, decided, you know what, this is a valuable piece of technology with data that I can teach content, perspective, and skills. Another thing that I love about Geographic Information Systems maps is that, you know, Alaska and Hawaii are not like tucked underneath Arizona, like on a lot of paper maps, because there's no room to fit them. So they're out there where they're supposed to be. That's nice. But let's zoom in. How am I zooming in? I can use the plus or minus, or I can hit the search tool, or I can hit shift, and with my touchpad or a mouse, I can band a box on this or any map in ArcGIS Online. And where I let go, you can see how my rectangle is sort of changing there. Where I let go, it's going to zoom to that spot. So that's kind of a handy way of zooming in to an area of interest. So just the shift key, and then you're basically banding a rectangle. So now I'm down in your part of the world, and I see these tiny red schoolhouses now. And I'm looking around at other good people in your area that are doing something with GIS in their schools. And so really, folks, I brought this up for a couple reasons. One, it's a story map with a bunch of tabs corresponding to those 1 through 7 items. We're going to make a story map here in a minute, but this is just another way of telling a story with maps. And we decided to show the distribution of educators using ArcGIS Online and all the things that you're immersed in as a story map, just because we wanted to tell the story, and that was the best way to do it. Yep, so if I click around at different schools around El Paso, this is public facing, so we don't want to list the individual names of the teachers, right, that are leading the charge here, but we wanted to give people some sense of, yeah, it's not just my own school that's interested in this. So if this is handy for you to, you know, when you have to do your advocacy from time to time with your principal and others, you might want to take a look at this.
Okay. The question is,
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. We have to, if you sign up for an ArcGIS Online organizational subscription in your school, yeah, we have to review it, and it takes about a week for it to actually then appear on the map. But look, Isleta Middle School, there you are right there. Cool. Yeah, awesome. Also, just one last note about this map, folks. This is international, not this particular map, because as you can see in the title, it's USK12, but as you saw, maybe kind of got into your minds when I was looking at the ESRI UK set of curricular materials, the ESRI Australia, this is a global thing. So I was down in Australia last year about this time, working with teachers down there. I've been to Esri, Japan, and elsewhere. So we've got a Esri East Africa office that works with schools and universities and community and technical colleges. So it's a global thing. Colombia is very active. So it kind of takes, as you know, not just a couple of people, but it's supported by a variety of folks. But to me, the real heroes are you teachers. Right? None of this would be happening if you didn't say, okay, I really think that we need to do some of this in school. So anyway, congrats once again for being interested, and I just wanted to show you that story map right there. Okay. All right, back to our outline. And by the way, as you can see, that story map has other tabs in it. So you've got other resources in there about who to contact, how can I get a GeoMentor, other things in there as well. But let's look at a couple of examples now that you know that you're not alone doing this in the school. Let's look at a couple of these. Number 30 on my outline anyway, but it's highlights of different example student projects. I'm going to click on that first one, right whales in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. This is as you can see, a story map. It tells a story about why these right whales are dying in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So in this case, it was a middle school student that made this. I'm a little hesitant on showing it because it's again, one of those really good examples, but this is we have story map contests every once in a while, and this was our winner this summer from Canada. So it's a middle school student that won the story maps contest. So it's one of the sort of the prime examples, I think, of what students can do with this, but don't think that the students can start like right with this. This is actually a fairly involved story map. I would keep things simple at the beginning, but nevertheless, you can see that the student has incorporated quite a bit of stuff in here. A map of where the whales are dying, with a little database behind each one. Yeah, so you got that. You've also got some images in here. You've got this critical habitats one, which I think is the third little tab in the story map on the left side. The student has just drawn a couple of polygons on a base map. So, nothing too overly involved, just drawing polygons to draw people's attention to where the problem is. And so feel free to browse through there for a few seconds, and I'll skip down to the last part that I really like in here. I'm going to skip to the second to the last tab or frame or section in the story map. But this is just a diagram, as you can see, a 3D diagram cross-section. So what I like about this is that the student identified a problem, right? They had a question, they identified a problem, they looked at some spatial data, they put it together in a story map, they incorporated some images, some text, some maps to tell the story of why this actually is a problem and why it matters. But the last piece that I wanted to share with you is that the student actually got this diagram of what we could do to help the situation. Not just that this is a problem, but what can we do about it? And so here in the second to the last section, the student used a diagram from a Woods Hole oceanographer and said, if we have this problem because these whales are getting tangled up in these lines to these lobster traps, why don't we have a wireless or lineless lobster trap so that there's nothing to snag the whales on? I really like this because, we oftentimes teach these lessons and we learn some things, but then, the whole geographic inquiry model, we ask a question, we investigate, we gather data, right? We analyze it, we assess it, and then oftentimes we move on to the next problem or issue. And oftentimes we don't incorporate okay, let's act on it. Let's propose some solutions. In this case, I think the student has done a very nice job of proposing a solution from this oceanographer. And thinking about your own local community, let's say your students have mapped, like you did earlier in the workshop yesterday, let's say they've mapped, I don't know, tree species. Maybe they've mapped invasive weeds in your community. Maybe they've mapped graffiti or trash. And okay, now that we've mapped these things, what can we do about it? On our campus, do we need a couple of extra like recycling bins? Or, you know, if there's a dangerous intersection in town, do we need a traffic light there? Do we need a crosswalk where there is none? You know, so think about proposing some sort of solution. In this case, the student didn't really have to do tons of extra work. They found this Mark Baumgartner and decided to use it in that student story map. So I like that. I like that solution proposed. So that's the story map. I want you to look at the Hans B's Montana student story maps back on our outline. And the reason why is because Hans up in Montana with his, in this case, high school, they've put together a gallery of some of the work that they've done. And if you scroll down a bit, you can see that the students have actually put it in a Weebly website. So they used Weebly.com to highlight their work. And each one of these is a example of these students with a lot of field work and some of the things that they've done. Now, one thing to be keeping in mind with this particular school is they are permitted, as few other schools do, to go out in the field often. So this probably is not your experience, right? But even in the limited amount of field work, even if it's just on your campus that you can do, like you were looking at yesterday, you can do some pretty powerful things just even on your campus, or even in the lab or in the library, right? So I just wanted to mention that because you might think, well, you know, I could never do what Hans is doing because I'm not permitted to do the kinds of things that he and his students can do. Well, okay, that's fine, but start something with something that you already know that we've explored in the last 2 days. This particular one, mud lake maps. So the students actually have gone out and measured the depth to the bottom of this lake. And they put it together in something that looks very similar to what we looked at yesterday with the Change Matters viewer. They put together a web mapping application where they see the time A, time B, and time C like we saw in our story map yesterday. But in this case, they've got different themes. So shaded relief, shaded depth, vegetation community, and vegetation class. So they put together a triplicate map, and we'll find out how to do that when we make a story map in a bit. Okay, so that's just another example of what you could do once you get your students using these tools. I think one of the things that we always want people to do is, hey, share these. Don't just do wonderful work in your classroom. If you've got some students that have done some work that you want to highlight, well, that helps them to be proud of their work, but it also helps you in your efforts in your own schools, right? Because then if your department head or your principal or your administrator says, why are you doing this in the classroom? You can say, look, this is all about inquiry. It's all about spatial thinking. It's all about critical thinking, problem-based learning, etc. Meaningful uses of technology. So I just encourage you at some point to highlight some student work. And if you want to totally make it anonymous, right? You don't have their names associated with it. You can totally do that too. All right, so that's a couple of highlights. On your own, you can take a look at that River Journey project, which is one of my favorites too, but we better move on to making a story map here before midday. Okay? How are folks?
So far, so good.
All right. All right, I love some of those examples. I really do. And I'm looking forward to seeing some of your examples in the future. All right. Back on our outline,
come to
let's,
I had them.
all right, super. So far, the last 2 days, and hopefully it doesn't seem like we've been together for months, folks. This is hopefully really interesting, and you're starting to think about your own ideas. But we've been working with a variety of different kinds of maps, data layers, so on. And you've kind of seen how you can, after you went out in the field, you can build some of these based on, for example, a spreadsheet of your own. Another way of creating content is to create a story map that is very similar to the one we just looked at in terms of the whales off of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where you've got audio, video, narrative, and some sort of interactive web map or maps that you're using to tell a story about tsunamis, earthquakes, tornadoes, population change, issues in my community, etc. Okay? And so I'd like you to use that practical exercise investigating story maps, explore the ESRI existing story maps gallery. So if you click on that storymaps.arcgis.com, it's a great way of introducing your students and you in the teacher professional development workshop to the value, the wonder, the glory of story maps. So I'm going to click on there and get to storymaps.arcgis.com. So as that's pulling up, with your teacher hat on, think about this is a way for you to introduce the whole idea of story maps to your students. I start with a gallery. With the gallery, I'm looking at a lot of different themes, features, etc., local to global, okay? And so with the thing that pulled up, hopefully you're seeing this what I'm seeing. Story maps, everyone has a story to tell. Harness the power of maps to tell yours. All good. Once you get that page up, I'd like you to click on Gallery. It's up in the upper left corner there. All right, super. So if you're seeing the gallery, I'd like you to do this. I'd like you to spend a few minutes and browse. You can see you can browse by the type of story map on the left side, and further on down, you can browse by subject matter, history, environmental, natural hazards, transportation, etc. Okay? So spend a few minutes and browse around in the gallery and find something that you might be able to actually teach with, or something that's of interest to you, okay? Either one. And I'll give you a few minutes to browse around in that gallery, and then we'll convene and go to the next step where you're actually building one, okay?
When you're ready.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say if anybody's found anything that is of interest, then please feel free to share. Something that you think you might be able to teach with, something that was intriguing to you as you looked around in the gallery there, the story maps.
The one I found was Esri campus tour, an early morning walking tour of the Esri campus in Redlands. And I just thought about the first week challenge that a lot of our kids had navigating school, trying to find their classes, and how cool it would be to, give parents a preview to the school, especially for kids in grade and what the school inside of the school up to people that don't know what it's like inside.
Awesome.
Esri campus tour. University.
Esri campus tour. Yeah, interesting.
As I'm looking through this, I'm thinking ahead, like we always start thinking, when our gears start going. And I'm in elementary, and I know that our teachers are time for each subject, and so, unfortunately, most of the time, and so what I was thinking is our campus the blended learning, project-based learning for our students. This would be an excellent way to target, especially social kids can really exceed standards along with the teachers.
Okay, thanks for that, Erica. Ideas that you guys came across. Yes. Can you hear us? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you to.
Yes, sir. Larry.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you to check your sound because we're getting some feedback here. I think it's your microphone or something.
Yeah.
We could hear a bit of blowing that was happening.
Yep.
Okay. Right.
Hey, folks, think about.
There's one more suggestion, Dr. K. Let's take
Yeah, there's some connectivity, but if we totally lose each other, and feel for the next step.
Yeah, I think we are. We are still with you. Okay. Can you hear us? Thank you, Dr. K.
Thank you, folks, for sharing. Again, think about possibly doing that with your students. I know they're going to find all kinds of different things out there, but it might be a nice way, and you can also direct them to a few that you want them to look at. So, for example, there's a new one on the Anthropocene, right, the age of humans, that might be quite appropriate for you to teach with. It's all about ecoregions and human impact on the landscape and so on. There's no shortage, as you saw in the gallery, of compelling story maps on a variety of different themes. And the reason why this got started is, let me share this slide with you all. Can you see this little globe here?
Not yet. I think,
Not yet? Okay. Let me share screen again here. Yep. Thanks for your patience. Okay, hopefully you are. Anyway, story maps are, as you saw, they're simple web apps. They combine maps, multimedia, and so on. The way that these got started is that Alan Carroll, who was chief cartographer at National Geographic, came to our organization, ESRI, a number of years ago and said, I've got this idea for story maps. And so we said, Alan, here's a team, here's the technology, here's the platform. And he assembled a team, and together they built the story maps capability. And for about 2 years, Alan and his team created a story map a week, many of which were in the gallery. But the more exciting thing was that when educators and city government and nonprofit organizations started using these, and so then you had the number of story maps just completely take off, where now you've got, this slide's a bit old, but now you've got about 650,000 of these, and only a small number of them actually make it into the gallery, as you saw. There's hundreds and hundreds in the gallery, but there's actually more sitting in the ArcGIS Online. So the advantage, I think, there's several advantages of using these in education. You can foster spatial thinking. Again, as I mentioned yesterday, you can use them as an assessment tool. If students make a story map on a topic, you could use that as your assessment measure. They could also present to you and their peers in the classroom with their story map in the same way that they would present with PowerPoint or Prezi or another tool. Let me show you, are you guys seeing this slide of mine with a picture of a story map in it? Okay, cool. So this is the kind of story map that we're going to make here in a moment. This is called a map tour. A map tour is a live interactive web map with a series of photographs across the larger image of whatever photograph you're looking at. In this particular case, the city of San Luis Obispo in California, they decided to present their police force with a story map. So they're basically saying, hey, here's the police in our community. They're real people. They've got real families, and these are the districts that they patrol. And so it's a kind of a way for them as a public relations sort of a outreach to get to know your police force, okay? So they decided to use a story map as the way to do it. The other method of creating a story map is with a journal. And this is that Age of Humans story map that I was indicating earlier that I mentioned, where you've got a variety of different themes, and it's a bit more powerful. It takes a bit more time to create one of these, but definitely doable. Another kind of story map is a series where you've got, in this example here, I've got in here the Exploring America's Natural Landscape. So there's a tab on land, landforms, geology, roads, provinces, etc. Okay, so that's a map series. Another kind is a swipe, as we saw yesterday, a swipe kind of a map where you got that little squeegee effect that goes across the map. And there's also something called the Spyglass, where, like this one, I'm showing San Francisco, current day, and then let's look back to 1859. Let's look at the historical map through this it's like a microscope. You're kind of looking back in time. Or it could be across theme. It could be population versus landforms. Another one's called a short list. So named because the little thumbnail images are a short list of things, and as you zoom and pan on the map, you see whatever the map extent shows. So this could be, instead of, as you see here, California colleges and universities, it could be famous landmarks in El Paso. It could be famous historical events in North Mexico and South Texas. It could be anything, but that's called a short list. There's also a Cascade Story Map. This is one of my favorites. It's called the Uprooted, and it's all about the Syrian refugees. It uses some really interesting 3D effects as well as some cartography with arrows showing the refugee situation. Okay, that's a cascade. Kind of gives you a flowing effect, as you've probably seen on a lot of web pages. And finally, as I showed way back at the beginning of today, remember I created that crowdsourced story map for all the participants in my course that were teachers. So where are you from? What's the landscape look like in your community? So there's a crowdsourced story map capability as well. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead in this gallery of slides to just say the following. These story maps are quite easy to make, as we will do here in this next section of our workshop. It's not going to take us very long, but it's going to be something that hopefully is really powerful. But before I do that, I want to show you one of my favorite story maps. You just shared some of your favorite story maps. I'm going to share one of mine. I've got lots of favorites, but let me just focus on one. And there's a couple reasons why I want to show you this. This particular map talks about the Titanic, okay? The voyage of the Titanic. And as you can see here, and you can type in Titanic in your story maps gallery and pull up the same map if you'd like. As you can see, this map has the ocean's base map as the base map, which makes sense because of the nature of the event that we're looking at. The second reason why I wanted to show it is because, like a lot of maps, they challenge our sort of preconceived stereotype of how the world works. And in this particular case, if a student thought that all of the passengers, now this is just passengers, it's not the crew, so get the students thinking about the data. There are other people on that ship as well. But just in terms of the passengers, I think the general perception is that they were all from Ireland, England, and the USA. When you can look at this map and find out that's really not the case. There were people from Lebanon, there are a lot of people from Scandinavia, as you can see, Southeast Europe, even some people from South Asia, Australia, China, India, etc. Even someone from Mexico. So that is another reason why I wanted to show it. The third reason why I wanted to show it is because it's an example of a tabbed story map. So as you tab across, notice how the graph, I mean, this is pretty grim, but notice how the graph changes in terms of who lived and died. So as I pan across first, second, and third class, you can see that if you're in third class, the results are not, the odds of you surviving are pretty small, right? So the last reason why I wanted to show it is because of what we talked about yesterday, that these maps have power because they are tied to a geo database. Okay? So, for example, every point on here corresponds to a record, just like the one you built yesterday when you came back from the field and you collected shrubs. Remember way back yesterday afternoon? When you collected that data and you created a little database, that's what's behind this map. And indeed, all maps that we've been examining in the last few days. So if I click on certain points, I can see that, for example, the folks from Montreal, there were several people from Montreal. Some of them lived, some of them died. It's the database, right, behind the scenes. I'm going to click on my own town of Denver, and there's a person named Mrs. Brown. Does anybody know about Mrs. Brown? The unsinkable Molly Brown, right? She got her title because she survived the sinking of the Titanic, and she was a very important figure in the Old West, especially here in Colorado where I am, but also elsewhere. So yeah, she survived and lived to tell about it, and did quite a bit of things out here. And we've got, as you would expect, lots of museums in the Denver area about Mrs. Brown. Anyway, so it's an example of a database behind the map. So if you were teaching about immigration back in the early 20th century and thinking about, okay, well, how did people get to USA, for example? Well, they didn't fly, right? They came across on ships, and this was one of them. So a lot of immigrants are on that ship, as well as other folks. And you could talk about that and weaving it into maybe your curriculum on early 20th century technology and early 20th century history. Interesting. Okay, so that's a story map. And again, easy to teach with. This could be a 10-minute lesson. It could be an hour long. It could be a couple class periods to supplement maybe your existing materials. Okay, so that is a story map example. Now, I'd like you folks to build one of your own. The one I want you to build is going to be very similar to, if I go back to the gallery and I look at the types of story maps on the left side, if I click on Map Tour, all of the story maps that show up in that, oops, I've got to exit Titanic and then Map Tour. So all of these story maps in this part of the gallery are all map tours. Historical houses, public art, etc. Those are all map tours, and that's the kind we're going to build right now. There's a couple reasons why I think map tours are a good place to start. Number one, they only point to one single web map. So in the map journal, you can point to numerous web maps, but a map tour only points to one web map. So it's a nice, simple way of getting students interested and into how to create one of these. And it's a good thing to do in a professional development situation like you all are in, because we can easily make one in the next few minutes. Okay? And they're powerful. That's another reason why I think they're valuable to use. So I'm going to skip down in this particular set of slides to the instructions for creating a map tour.
Okay.
Yeah, you probably saw in the gallery, how do I get my students' work in the gallery? Well, we do have a way for you to do that. And it's basically knowing one of us on the education team. And so if you have a really stellar example, just feel free to shoot me an email that says, hey, Joseph, this is some work that my students have done, and we'd really like to feature it on the gallery. Now, before you think about featuring it on this gallery here, I would think about creating your own gallery that highlights your student work, like what Hans did in Montana, where he's got just a selection of what his students had done and featuring it on your own ArcGIS online organizational account. Now, more about accounts later with Dr. M. But for example, if you've got, this is where I need Ms. Duran, Isleta Middle School, they've got an ArcGIS online organizational account somewhere. I'm not quite sure what the URL would be, but maybe Ms. Duran could help me. Ms. Duran, what do you think? Can we show your homepage there on your ArcGIS Online gallery? Cool beans. All right. The reason why I didn't want to put you on the spot there, Ms. D, but I wanted to indicate to all y'all out there that and it's not public yet, so no worries. You don't have a public-facing page, otherwise it wouldn't ask me to sign in, but no worries. Let's say you've got, I don't know, yeah, no worries. But the point is that in your own school's organization page, you can make a section of it public, and you can feature some of the story maps and other maps that your students have done, other projects they worked on with this technology. Something to think about down the road. I don't advocate doing it in the next few weeks, but as you journey forward in this geotechnology journey, you might want to think about hosting some maps on your own school's organizational page. Okay, it's different from your school's website. But you could point to it from your school's website, and that way parents and and others, when they get to your school's website, they can say, "Oh gosh, I've heard about this geotechnology thing that you guys are doing. Let me see a couple of examples," and they'd be able to do that. Okay, so fascinating to be able to think about that. The reason why I bring it up now is because I'd rather have you feature some things on your own page first before you say, "Hey Joseph, I want this to be featured on the big gallery," because it's sort of I think a two-step process. Get it featured on your school's page first, and then think about pinging me with a note. Okay? All right, very good. We'll wait for that to pull up. All right, no worries. So back on our task for the moment, I want you to actually build a story map. Now we've been, just in the last few minutes, we went to story maps, right? And we went to the gallery, right? And we looked at some different maps in there. And there's two ways of teaching with story maps in my way of thinking about this. Method A, you teach with existing story maps, right? There's no shortage of subjects, themes, scales, etc. Method B is you have your students and you yourself create your own story maps, okay? They're both valid, and I would love for you to do both, but I would start with what we've already done in the class today. I'd have you start with using existing story maps and find something that you might be able to fit into your curriculum. Ideally, it's something that you already teach, right, rather than something you would additionally do. And that comes around to, our whole philosophy on this, folks, is really find something that you're already teaching and find out how it might be enhanced by geotechnologies, rather than add this to your already crowded existing curriculum, right? You're busy people. Find something that actually you're already teaching that would be enhanced by doing this. Okay. But that would be method A. Method A, using existing story maps. But method B is completely viable. And method B is creating your own. It's not going to take long. And where we've been is in this gallery, right? But I want you to click on apps this time in the upper left of the story maps zone. Go ahead and click on apps this time. We're going to create our own story map here in the next few minutes. This will be exciting times, folks. Right before lunchtime, you get to create your own story map. Cool beans. Okay, super. So now you're going into the apps zone. And once you go into the apps zone, it's going to say, okay, what kind of story do you want to tell? When you're creating something, as you know from yesterday's conversation, you're actually going to need to log in, right? To look at the gallery of story maps, as you did a moment ago, you don't need to log in, right? Those are all public facing, nothing to log into to look at ecoregions, population, Titanic, etc. You don't need to log in. But now, to create your own, you actually are going to log in. And once you go to the apps section, you see that there is as you scroll down, there's a whole different array of things to do, ranging from that swipe map we talked about briefly yesterday, to the short list, to the story map, journal, series, etc. I'm going to start with the very top one, though, because as I mentioned, I always like to have students have one really good success right at the beginning, so they have confidence that they can move forward. Same with you all. I want you to start with a map that we're all going to create together, and then get you thinking about, oh, well, I can create my own on a topic that I'm interested in. And so let's start with something that we can actually have all success with together. Now, one professional development note: if you're teaching a group of your colleagues at some point in the future, it's always tempting, I know, to have them start with something they're interested in. But I would just highly advise you doing it like we're going to do in the next 5 minutes. In other words, have them make something that is a common map for everyone. And the reason why is because A, you want to start pretty small, and B, you want to make sure that all of the online content, photos, videos, etc., are already in place. When you create your own, you have a wide variety of choices. You know, where are your photos? Where are your videos? How are you going to integrate it all? So I'd like to start with, you know, again, keeping it pretty simple and basic. Okay? So let's start with this. We're in the apps zone, and right underneath where it says, what kind of story do you want to tell? See where it says a sequence of place-enabled photos or videos, story map tour? Yep, okay, good. Let's start there, where it says build, that bluish box that says build. And the first thing it should say is, okay, you want to build a story map. If you're going to create content, that means you need to park it somewhere. You need to put it somewhere, and therefore you need to log in so that you can actually save it. And this is where that login that you had yesterday, either the T3G login or your school account, is going to come in very handy here, because this is what I want you to put in for the login. It's the same account you used yesterday, okay? Okay, so just to recap, we went to storymaps.arcgis.com. We went to the gallery and hung out there for about 10 minutes. You looked at the story maps that were there. And now we went to the apps zone. The apps allows you to create your own story maps, okay? And once we went to the app zone, we said, oh, build. And once I build, it's going to make me log in. And then we'll be in this builder mode where it's going to ask you where your content is located. Now, one note about content here in story maps: it has to be online, okay? It cannot point to your local machine, your local device, right? Story maps are web-based tools, so the content needs to be online that you use to create them. They don't have to be shared with everyone. They can be private. They can be just shared with your class, right? If your students are creating story maps, you probably don't want to share them with the whole world, right? You just want to have them viewable by your class. More about that later, but that's totally possible. Okay, so just because the content's online doesn't mean your story map has to be shared with the world, okay? Now, just checking, you went to story maps, you went to ARC, the apps place, right? And you logged in. And you said, I want to build a map tour. And that's where we are right now. So is everybody at this screen here? Oh, you folks are so good. You, vous, ustedes, right? You're awesome. Okay, I'm going to show this slide because this is what I want you to do over the next few minutes. I want you to create a story map on a campus sustainability theme. Now, many campuses, universities, community colleges, even a couple K-12 schools have a sustainability initiative on campus where they've got compost bins and they've got a school garden, right, or a university garden, or they have a community garden for the community. And they have bike racks, and they've got maybe even some solar panels on the roof, and they've got recycling bins, etc. Right? And they've got carpool initiatives and so on. It's all part of their campus sustainability initiative. So that's the story that I actually want you to get into here in the next few minutes. So I'm going to have you've already done step 1. Are you folks seeing this slide right here? Create a story map tour, great. I'm going to leave this up for about 5 or 6 minutes. I'm going to have you add, I'm going to have you start with number 2, which is the screen we're on right now. You're going to go to the Google Plus Picasa Web Zone. You're going to actually type in my own email address, as you can see there. And you're going to point to a folder called the Esri Sustainable Campus. I've got 5 photographs in there, and you're going to import. And then you're going to add some captions in step 3. You're going to change the base map to imagery. You are going to experiment with rearranging the order of things, and you're going to save it. That's it. So you've got 5 steps, 2 through 6, to go through, and I will be here. Dr. M will be here. Is Dr. Ontiveros in there today? She's not there. She's probably, getting ready for the school year to start, right? But Ms. Duran is there, all kinds of good people. The student is there that could roam around and help you all. So we're here for you, folks. All right, map on. Yes, sir. Let me start with the first step then. So I'm out here. Yes?
They say number 2 is not working.
Yeah, so let me guide you through that one. So where are your images or videos? They're already online. So I'm going to go to this G+ zone. I'm going to type in my own email address, and then I'm going to look up. Okay. And if I go there and I look up, let's see here. Interesting. Yeah, I see your point. Okay. So let's go back and let's go to let me do a little experimentation here. Let me see if I've got my Flickr photos there. Okay, good. So let's go back. I'll have to investigate that. I'm not quite sure why that's not working today. It was working in the last workshop. So let's go to where are your images or videos? Let's go to the Flickr zone. Okay. So that's the left panel there, left choice. They are already online. And it's going to be JJ Kursky. Let me type that into the, okay, here, into the box. Good with that? Cool beans. So this is Flickr, and notice that I've got some albums in there. I've got Bookcliff Middle School. That second one there that says there's 6 photos, let's go ahead and select that one. Bookcliff Middle School, 6 photos. I'm going to go ahead and import those. Okay, so JJ Kursky, Flickr, Bookcliff Middle School, import. Now, hang on. Let me try something else. All right. Let's do this. Let's go back, and before we say import, let's go back if you don't mind. Let's select that first one, Bookcliff Middle School 2:1. Let's select that one. That's even simpler and it'll be better. Okay. Go ahead and import Bookcliff Middle School 2:1. There's 1 photo in there, and I think bandwidth being what it is, that might be a bit more successful. Okay, so once it found the photo, notice how there's a tab that says to locate, and if it didn't find your location of your photo, you'd have to drag it to the correct location on the map. In my case, it actually located 1 photo that I took there at the middle school, and I'm going to go ahead and say import. So import. So here is my beginnings of my sustainability map of the middle school. So as you can see, I've got an aspen tree here. This is Colorado, western Colorado. I can zoom in on the map. I'm going to zoom way in to the middle school campus. I'm going to keep that push pin visible as I zoom in. And there is the school campus. And there is the location of the aspen tree on the southwest corner of the campus. Great. Okay, I can change the color of the push pin if I wanted to, and so on. So within a few seconds, you have created the beginnings of a story map, correct? If you had more photos, it would have been maybe a bit more interesting, but does that make sense? You basically went to the apps zone and you said, I want to create it, and I've already got photos online somewhere. So in this case, I can add a caption. I can say, this is an aspen tree right on the southwest corner of Bookcliff Middle School. So, great. And as I indicated in those short set of instructions, I want you to change the base map. How do I do that? Well, there's a bunch of tools out there. And notice that there's one up in the upper right of the existing map, which is the outline of the buildings in that area. I can change the base map to something like imagery with labels. And then I'm going to be able to see in the base map the actual outline of the school because it's a satellite image in this case. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more because I want to talk about something here in a bit that'll be really interesting. Okay, you guys have created a story map with one picture in it, and you've changed the base map to a satellite image, correct? All right, pretty easy, right? Pretty simple, but hopefully powerful. So now envision you out there, as you did yesterday with your GPS unit. What if you had collected photographs of different things on campus, shrubs, light poles, recycle bins, etc., street crossings, and so on. What if you had done that? You could bring in those photos and make a story map out of the different images that you had taken. Okay? Make sense? And you would do it just like you did here. If you had more photos, you'd be able to do a little bit more powerful things with it. So does that make sense? If you had photos, you could make a story map from it, or a video. Okay. Now let's think about a couple of other things. Notice as I zoomed in on the satellite image, I'm really pretty impressed by the location, because this tree is actually really close to where it's supposed to be on the campus. You see this little, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, my mouse, but this little shrub zone that this tree is sitting on is actually on the southwest corner of the campus. That where this photo is actually located is maybe 2 meters off. Maybe 2 meters off. How did it know where the photograph was taken? Exactly. I took the photo with my location-based services on my phone. And the location-based services are based on 3 things. GPS, the GPS constellation, cell phone towers, so triangulating off of cell phone towers, and Wi-Fi hotspots, so triangulating off of pretty much the Internet of Things, the location of those Wi-Fi hotspots. So the combination of all those 3 things gives me a pretty accurate position of my photograph. Not exactly, but pretty close. Now, your results may vary. If you're collecting data in some canyon in West Texas, right, surrounded by a bunch of steep cliffs, or if you're in downtown El Paso with a bunch of high buildings, or if you're right next to the school building, or if you're inside the school taking a picture outside the window, right? Your position is going to be compromised. It's going to be blocked by all those solid objects. So you may have to do what I'm going to do right here, and you may have to grab the point. You can actually move it a little bit. So I'm going to grab this point and shift its location a little bit. So I can do that as well. So the point is that your point might not be exactly where you want it to be, but it should be close. And if it's not close, you can move it around a little bit. So yeah, it's a case where if you did not have any sort of location on your photos, you can still work with it because you can move it to the correct location. Like let's say you had a regular camera with no GPS on it, or your photos were taken inside, or you were, like I said, in a downtown situation, or really close to a tall building, or close to a steep canyon wall or a cliff of some sort. So there's a variety of ways to get your photos to their correct spots. But the idea is you can create a story map with these photos. All right, very good. So you've created a story map. Maybe not very exciting, but it's the start of it. Now let's do a couple more things. And one of which is up in the upper left, there is a save button, correct? And it's going to save it based on whatever you call it here in the title. So I'm going to call it Book Cliff Middle School, and I'm going to call it El Paso Workshop, August 2018, something like that. So that I'll know when I look at all of my maps, that I'll know that I created this today. And I'll know I created it during the workshop. So title it something that makes you realize when you created it and why. Another reason to do that is because if your students create a similar map and they all store it inside your school's ArcGIS Online account, you don't want 30 story maps called Isleta Middle School, correct? You don't want them all to be named the same thing. You want them all to be slightly different, unless the students are collaborating on the same map, in which case we will talk about that. So I'm going to save it now in the upper left, saving story. And don't worry, folks, hang in there another minute. We're almost done. Got one last thing to show you. And that is this box that shows up once you save it. Now, I don't know why many applications nowadays have a disk for their save button. I mean, do your students even know what a floppy disk is? It's something in a museum, right? I mean, it's maybe something they've got that they saw at a yard sale somewhere. Anyway, I think that's kind of funny. Anyway, let's look at this box that appears once you save. You can use My Stories to check your story for errors, change how it's shared, etc., etc. Let's go ahead and click on My Stories. Now yours is going to look slightly different from mine because you're all logging in a different way. Some of you are logging into your school account. Some of you are logging into your T3G account for the purposes of the workshop. Some of you might have a developer sandbox type of account. So you're going to see something different than I'm looking at. But the latest map that you've made should be right at the top, which is, in my case, Book Cliff Middle School, El Paso Workshop, August 2018. Do you guys see that at the top? I clicked on My Stories.
How do we get there if we didn't click on that?
Oh, okay. So back on, I'm going to close this. Let's say I'm back at my map. Yep. And if the save button is not active because I haven't actually changed it from the last time, so I need to make some slight change. Let me make it, maybe change it to imagery with labels, maybe zoom out a little bit. You know, I want to make some change so that the save button is active again. And it's bluish when it's active. That means I need to save it again. And that's another point to make pretty clear here, folks. When you're creating maps and story maps in ArcGIS Online, it's not like Google Docs where you've got an autosave, right? You need to save often. Number one, save often. Number two, do not use the back button on your web browser. Right? You know where I'm going with that, right, folks? If you're browsing around web pages, most of the time, the back and forward button are your friends, right? You use them frequently. But if you're in the middle of an active edit session, when you're making a map, and you haven't saved, and you use the back button, it's going to go back to whatever you had before you started making that map. So all of the changes from the last 30 minutes or whatever are going to be lost. So that's something to keep in mind. That's sort of a hard lesson learned, but I thought an important point to make right here. So I'm going to hit the save button again, and coming back to your point, saving story. Now I've already gone to my stories. So if you save it again, you might not see that box. So you might have to go to this storymaps.arcgis.com in a separate tab. And when you do, if you're logged into that tab, you should see several tabs that we've seen before, one of which was the gallery. Remember we looked at the Story Maps gallery? One of which was the apps, which is where we started about a half hour ago when we said, I want to make a map tour. The other one that I'm skipping over is resources, where we've got all kinds of help documents, like how to make story maps and how to make them look really, really nice and how to make them shine. And then this last tab in here is called My Stories. So you should be able to get to My Stories from that tab if you've lost that tab somehow. Not to worry. So if you're in My Stories, you'll see your story map at the very top. And as you keep making maps, you'll have other things in there, as I do here. I've got a whole bunch of story maps that I've created over time. So once you get to the My Stories zone, go ahead and access the map that you just made. And then you can get into Edit Story again. So that's where you can actually pick up maybe tomorrow with, I want to go back and tinker with and tweak and adjust where what I left off the day before. So that is, I think, going to be a really powerful thing. The My Stories zone allows you to add stuff to your story map, to delete stuff from your story map, to make sure all the links work, etc. And it also, lastly, allows you to do something that we touched on about 10 minutes ago, and that is who can look at it, how it's shared. So in my case, I've got Bookcliff Middle School, El Paso Workshop, August 2018. If I look on the left side of that, it says shared : private. In other words, nobody can actually look at this except me. Nobody can access it. I can also share it with my own organization, which will be your school. You can also share it with a subgroup in your school, like your AP Human Geography students, or your math students, or your language arts students, etc. You can also share it with the whole world with making it public. So that's a brief tour of making a story map and a little bit about how to manage your story maps once you've created it. Any questions about that?
So
You want me to step through how we did that again?
From the point when you save the story map, right? Yeah. How did you proceed from here?
Yeah, actually, let me go to the very beginning, and it'll take me about 2 minutes, and then I promise to release you. So, is that okay?
That's fine.
All right, this will be a little review. So we started with the gallery, correct? We were looking at all kinds of different story maps a half hour ago, and you found some things that were compelling in that gallery. Great. But now I want to create my own story map. And so I don't go to the gallery, right? I go to the apps zone. Once I go to the apps zone, it's going to ask me, okay, what kind of story map do you want to make, and where's your content stored? So if I go to apps, it's going to, let's see here, having a little bit of bandwidth issues at the moment, but no worries. Let's go to, ditch that tab. Let's go to apps. All right, here we go. What kind of story do you want to tell? Well, we know that we wanted to make a story map tour, so we're going to go to right underneath story map tour and say build. And in our case, in our example, we started with apps, build a map tour. Great, that's exactly what I want. I want a map tour, which gives me a linear place-based narrative featuring images or videos. That's exactly what I want. Each story point in the tour narrative is geolocated. Your readers can click sequentially through the tour. They can also browse by interacting with the map or using an optional thumbnail carousel. That's exactly what kind of story map that we built, is the map tour. Okay, so we're going to go there. And now that I'm logged in, right, this is logged into your own ArcGIS Online account or the temporary one that you're using here in the workshop. Either way is fine. But then it asks you, okay, where's your content? Now, I kind of breezed by this a moment ago, but if you don't have content that's online, you can upload it here in this right-hand side, where you can say, hey, I don't have any content online. I need to upload a few images, for example, to ArcGIS Online. I tend to not use ArcGIS Online for my photographs. I tend to use it for the maps. But you're perfectly fine with using it for maps and photos and videos. But what we did together was hey, mine are already online, and I'm going to use Flickr in this case. In this case, I entered my own email ID in Flickr, and I looked up, and this is where, be sensitive to bandwidth. If you have all the students making a common story map right away, you don't want to point to something that has 100 photographs. You know what I mean? You just don't want to have 30 students all pointing to 100 photographs. That's just a lot of bandwidth being consumed by it figuring out where all those photographs are located. And I clicked on Book Cliff Middle School. That is the, all that being said, be organized about where your content is stored. So if you've got content for a particular theme, like shrubs on your campus or intersections in El Paso, put them in a folder. Keep life easy on yourself. Don't just kind of have these scattered around in different locations on the web. You can still work with them in different locations, but I think it's a little cleaner to put them all in a folder. So I'm going to say import, and then it says, oh, okay, I have located one photograph. That's what this tab means. Located one photograph. This to locate, if you ever encounter that in the future, it means that it can't find that one because of, like I said before, it doesn't have some sort of geolocation on it. But this did have a geolocation, and it found it, and we're going to go ahead and say import. And this is where we started, where this is my beginnings of my tree species on campus. And in this case, because I don't want it to be, the whole of North America, I zoomed in until I actually saw the campus where I collected this particular photograph, and it was right here. Okay, so right on the southwest corner of that school. I edited the caption a bit, the beginnings of my campus vegetation story map. Okay, great. So I've got a caption in there, and that's all good. So at this point, we could change the base map, as we did, to a satellite image base. Remember that? I changed it to imagery with labels. But since I did that last time, this time let's change it to Openstreetmap. So I get some detail. This is a crowdsourced, citizen science-based kind of a map, and I've got some decent detail in there of streets and sometimes trees and trails and stuff like that. So I'm going to change it to Openstreetmap. And then in the upper left, I've got a save, but since I don't like this title, I'm first going to tweak the title, and I'm going to call it this, okay? And then I'm going to save it, and it's going to say, great, you've saved your story, and now I could come back to it tomorrow, exactly where I left off, or my students could come back to it tomorrow, right? They don't have to start completely over, because you've got this content saved. And once you've got the content saved, you can, again, adjust it, and you get this little pop-up, if it's the first time you've saved it, to go to the My Stories zone, And now I'm going to have two maps from today, right? I'm going to have the one I made 10 minutes ago, and I'm going to have the one I just made. And they're going to have different titles. So I'm going to go ahead and ditch this tab and come back to my stories. And this is where I manage my content, just like OneDrive or Google Drive, or in this case, it's just your story maps. So here I've got two stories. One, the one I made 10 minutes ago, and then this new one is at the very top. El Paso, PD, August 2018. And then I could go into that and start changing the thumbnail. I can change how it's shared. I can check the status of it. Is it actually working? All the images are working, so on and so forth. Okay? So I hope that was a good review. This thing I've got right now, it's got two things. It's got a map behind it, which is called Bookcliff Middle School, and it's got a bunch of images. Actually, there's only two images, and they're both the same image. One is the big image that shows up on the left side of the map. This one right here. Let's see, this one right here. And then I also have a thumbnail if I ever wanted to use it as well. Okay, so that's a summary of what we did with creating the story map tour. Does that make sense? Oh, you folks are the best. Thanks for hanging in there. So, to sum, I just have a couple points that I want to raise. First of all, I'm hoping you're seeing this slide. It's a geeky photo of me by the story map sign. Anyway, three key points. The story maps available that you can use in education, they're rapidly expanding. So there's more styles, there's more types, there's more functionality. But don't let that stress you out, because every time they evolve, they become easier to use. They just do. The third thing to point out here is that just like when you're going out in the field with your students, or just like you're starting a new unit with your students, you plan ahead. You don't just sort of plunge in and say, okay, we're going to make a story map. So I kind of brushed by, in the interest of time, why a map tour, for example, would be a good choice for your vegetation map. But I kind of touched on it a little bit. It's an easy to use one. It's going to tell a good story. We didn't finish it with every single photo that you might have taken, but the point here is that good planning is wise. So you think about what kind of story you want to tell, and that kind of structures what kind of story map to make. Okay? Just like when you go out in the field, you plan what you're going to collect, what units, right? What equipment, how long you're going to be out there in the field. You have a little safety discussion with the students, right? And so on. Questions, comments, issues? Thank you. And since we didn't get to cover for example, the global plate tectonics, perhaps you can lead them through that.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, Dr. K. So yeah, thanks so much for that. I think a great session.
That was a lot, and I appreciate you hanging in there with them, and they did a great job.
Yeah, certainly. I think that gives them, it's a very good, this will get us on.